Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me as I speak with Professor Naazish Ata-Ullah, and I'm so honored and glad that she has agreed to this conversation. Uh, Professor Naazish Ata-Ullah, affectionately known as Najji, is an artist, an educator, a curator. She's a writer, she's a human rights activist, and her roles have often overlapped over the last few years between curating, writing about art, exhibiting her own work, and educating people. And amongst her various and extremely prestigious accolades, Professor Ataullah is a fellow and former principal of the National College of Art, NCA, where she also founded and developed their very well known and renowned printmaking department, as well as its first studio master's program, its library infrastructure, and its international exchange programs. Professor Naazish Ata-Ullah studied at the Slade School of Fine Arts and the Institute of Education, UCL, in London, and at the National College of Arts, Lahore. In 2010, she was awarded a knighthood in the Order of Arts and Literature by the Republic of France, very fancy, and currently she lives and works in Lahore. She has served in a vast number of advisory roles at educational, cultural, and social justice institutions, including the Lahore Museum, the Shakir Ali Museum in Lahore, the Lahore Biennale Foundation, the Lahore Literature Festival, the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, and the Punjab Higher Education Commission. She is a senior fellow at the School of Visual Art and Design, Beacon House National University, and a tutor at the NCA. She has also exhibited within Pakistan and internationally and has lectured widely, authored monographs, contributed to academic books and journals, and curated exhibitions in Pakistan, Finland, and at Cartwright Hall in the UK. So I am delighted to have her here with me today. And it's really so exciting to speak to you formally like this because we've often spoken in the past. But I think the great thing about some of these conversations is getting such a great insight into the artist's thought process, their sort of journey in through the arts in a way that we often can't, in brief moments, you can't talk about that properly. But I wanted to ask you about your journey towards art because I understand that you moved towards art in NCA as a mature student. You were a little bit older than regular BA children. And I wanted to ask about that process. What was the impetus that sort of pushed you towards pursuing art?
Well, I was almost 10 years older than everyone who joined with me. So I was like almost 28 years old when everyone else was about 18 years old. And actually, the wonderful thing about the National College of Arts was that there was no age bar.
Hmm.
And I had been actually a student of English literature, and I did literature for my BA at Kennett College, and then I went on to Karachi University. But I didn't complete my MA. I got married. And so I
Okay.
thought that, okay, it's a good idea now that I moved around and came back to Lahore in the mid 70s. And I thought it would be a good idea to actually go back and pursue that MA degree at Punjab University. And when I tried to do that, I couldn't because they had some sort of a ban on students who were older graduates. So I was very frustrated by that. And of course, across the road was the National College of Arts. And I was great friends with Zahra Clark in particular, as well as with the late Shahid Sajjad. Who these people I got to know Zahur through Shahid in Karachi. And so there was always a kind of conversation going on that was to do with art, and I was friends with Sherzad. And more than anything else, my mother is an artist. And so in our house, there was always, painting and paints, the smell of paint. And she used to paint portraits, and she used to work with all kinds of different mediums. And I suppose I didn't go into the arts because you know how you hesitate to do something that your mother does,
Yeah.
particularly. It's that mothers and daughter kind of thing. And but strangely enough, that's how it happened. And I came and I applied and I appeared for the entrance test, and all kinds of people helped me, including Bashir Saab, who was helping me, to learn how to draw in preparation for the entrance test. And then I got, strangely enough, I mean, I just got admission, and I remember I remember Khalid Iqbal Saab and Colin David, who were on my committee at the entrance test, and they were very encouraging, and they said, oh yes, well, I had applied for the design department, but they said, oh no, why don't you go into fine art? But I did the first year, which is a foundation year, and then switched to fine art. So
But
that's
how
the
wonderful
story
to
of
have
how I
such,
got there.
no, and how wonderful to have such mentors and art world titans really supporting you and encouraging you and helping along the way.
No,
What a
I
great.
had a wonderful time. I mean, I never failed to talk about all the wonderful people who taught me, because I learned so much from them and became friends with them. For example, Sarima Hashmi, who was my teacher, and uh, and then became a very dear friend. And Khalid Saab, with whom I would sit and have a cup of coffee and go and often visit him at home, and we talked about Vermeer and with all kinds of other um, artists, particularly I remember talking about Vermeer to him, and I was doing this painting. I remember with a little boy who is now one of the people working in the college,
Oh,
and
okay.
he was standing against a wall, and I was painting this particular wall, and obviously it was the light that was a major concern, and Khalid Saab telling me, well, you know, look at that more carefully, and then Shahid Jalal joined at the same time, almost at the same time as me, and so we became great friends, having sandwiches together and talking about art. And there's this wonderful painting that is in his studio of the our entire group of fine art students. There weren't that very many people in one class at the time. Must have been about 8 or 10 people. But this is
It
in the
sounds
late 70s.
it sounds quite idyllic, and I do have to say, whenever you read about, I don't know, great artists of the past or art movements of the past, it's always so fascinating to hear about how they were all friends with one another and the casual times that they had. So it's so fascinating to hear all of this. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I think it's a real privilege. And also with all the people who were my class fellows, because, the wonderful thing about the National College is that you get students from all over the country.
Of
And
course.
I remember the most fascinating, I mean, the students who came, Jamal Shah, Akram Dost Baloch, Kaleem Khan, they were all with me. And I learned so much from them. I learned more about their culture. I learned about their customs. I learned about, just the interaction with them was just so rewarding. So I think I mean, it was the greatest privilege of my life. So I used to send my children off to school. And I used to come to college myself.
That's
And
quite
then
fun. Get rid of them quickly.
so this is
Were
what
they
I did.
quite interested as well in what you were doing? Did they ever want to come to NCA and kind of join your classes?
Well, one of my daughters did join NCA eventually, but I
Really?
think at the time they were both really quite. They just thought their mother's a bit mad, because she would drag them to demonstrations on Mall Road, and because I was a member of the Women's Action Forum, and with the Hudud ordinances came about, and just I mean, this is the time of Zia, and so the students at the National College, in any case, which was National College was like an island. It was a very exceptional place.
Hmm.
And there was this real sort of camaraderie between students and faculty, and they were very conscious of what was going on outside in the country, what were the political kind of developments that were taking place, the kind of social change that was occurring. I mean, I remember very distinctly things like, for example, there was no question of heroin, for example. I remember the time when heroin started being peddled on the streets of Lahore. And before that, you'd never heard of it. And there were people who became addicts only because they thought that if they smoked it, nothing would happen to them. But this was all because of the Afghan, the whole problem between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the what was happening at that time.
And I think also extremely a lack of education about the dangers of this drug. But I wanted to ask you about the Women's Action Forum because I know that you have been an important member of it. It's been very close to your heart as a cause, as a movement. And I was wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I think that, the Women's Action Forum is the most amazing kind of social movement that took place at a time when there were um, essentially the whole fight was with the constitution, really, and the kind of laws that came about that were totally contrary to women's rights. And I mean, even to date, from the time that the hudud ordinances were enacted, even now we have not been able to get rid of many of the things that were
Hmm.
incorporated in them. And it is at that time that women felt very, very vulnerable. And I think that there were a lot of different people who were within the Women's Action Forum who were also connected to the National College of Arts, particularly Lala Roch. Who was in the
Yes.
Department of Fine Art, and she's one of the founders of the Women's Action Forum. But along with the women, you see, for me, my relationship that went back to my childhood was with Asma Jahangir and Hina Jilani. Their father was a great friend of my father's. And so this kind of political environment and the discussions that took place around them was something that I was very familiar with.
Hmm.
And also that I believed in, and also that I was involved in. So it was just natural that one would have moved into the Women's Action Forum and continue to work as an activist and as a member. And then as the years have gone by, the responsibilities have changed, and sometimes they've become more intense, and sometimes they're more of an advisory nature, and all times they're part of the advocacy that we carry out. I mean, it's a great pressure group, and and that led to my connection to the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan,
Okay.
because that was founded in 1987. And I'm also one of the earliest members of the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan. And that is something, again, as over the years, I mean, I was always supporting what the Human Rights Commission stood for, what they were fighting for, and particularly for women's rights, for minorities' rights, and for children's rights, for the rights of workers and labor and so on. I mean, there's a huge mandate. But after I retired, I became more and more involved with them. And
Wonderful.
to the extent that I stood for elections and, got
Okay.
elected to the council. And again, I've been elected to the council. So I'm really very actively involved in that. So that's my parallel life. Because I would
But
say
it's
that,
wonderful
okay,
to
what am I
see.
doing? I'm doing two or three things at the same time,
Well, that keeps
and
you young and motivated always. And I think it's interesting to see how your life at NCA moved in tandem and overlapped with the other projects that you were taking on and other causes that you were fighting for. And I also love how you kept this sort of spirit of spearheading different projects in every aspect of your life. Because from what I understand, you were one of the founders of the printmaking department in NCA, in addition to then becoming the principal. So could you talk a little bit about that as well? What led to you wanting to set it up, and what was that journey like? So not only were you teaching there, you also actually set up an entire wing of it.
well, I think that basically, all these things are
Of
collective
course.
enterprises. And so the discussion that was taking place in the 70s among some of the younger faculty at the time, people like Salima, people like Zahurullah Clark, who were, there was this, and several other people, but anyway, these people in particular, who were, let's just say, they were the thinkers, and the traditional practices at the fine art department at NCA were, of course, drawing,
Mm,
uh, painting, and sculpture. These were the three sort of any modern art school would have these three areas that were taught. and we people like myself went through that kind of learning. So, but you see, with if you look at the work of particularly of Zahra Clark, who was making this great investigation into traditional art, into calligraphy, into miniature painting, but it was at a philosophical level, and he was also trying to make these connections between he was trying to look at what was happening in the Western world and what was
Mm-hmm.
happening in our part of the world, and how all these things could actually come together, and through his own work, through his own ideas, his own questions about two-dimensionality and so on. And I think that is what led to basically he had made a lot of prints while he was at the Royal College of Art and at the Hornsey School of Art in the late 60s when he went to study in England. And but somehow it never could really come about in the context of the National College.
Mm.
So when myself and um, Anwar Saeed, both of us were on a British Council scholarship in England.
Okay.
In 1984, we coincided. Anwar was studying illustration at the Royal College of Art. I was studying both at the Institute of Education as well as at the Slade School of Fine Art under Barto dos Santos, and
Oh,
learning how to
fabulous. Look at
etch.
you.
So when we both returned to Lahore, I think the conversation in the college was that we really have to expand the areas of specialization. And
Uh-huh.
so that is the time when the miniature painting department was set up. And the idea was that we should set up a printmaking department so
Mm.
that the printmaking department could be this really experimental space, and using all kinds of techniques and working with processes, and somehow this kind of interaction between other areas of the fine art department and the printmaking department, or indeed the miniature painting department, could all sort of set off another form of energy. And that's what we participated in. That's how it came about.
Wonderful. And tell me about it must have been pretty difficult as well to set up the department. Did this then prepare you for the task of becoming the principal of NCA? What was
No,
that
I
like?
don't think that I mean, you learn some administrative things, but that's not really a kind of preparation. I think
No.
for me, I wasn't really particularly prepared. I think it was more to do with what I believed in. But I really did believe when I became principal, the idea was for me, the academic side of the institution was the most important, because
Mm.
the other aspect of it, the development side of it, was actually quite problematic because there was always shortage of money, because the
Mm.
arts are not always in the topmost priority for any government organization, and for the budget giving people, for the Higher Education Commission. I mean, they were very supportive, but at the same time they didn't. I mean, for example, if this had been an institute of science and technology, you would have had greater financial support. But this
Yeah,
was an
that's true.
institute of the arts. And so the challenge was becoming principal was, okay, then what am I going to be focusing on? So there were obviously 3 or 4 areas that I was particularly interested in. And one of them was to start a kind of academic conversation in a formal way that would be across the entire college. And so to make some kind of a committee or a board of studies where there would be this sort of conversation going on, where we are talking about the integration of our
Mm.
programs instead of actually dispersing them and doing them absolutely in their own little slots, which I
Mm.
didn't think was a great idea. I felt that that whole approach, that's how, even when the Mayo School of Art was set up, the kind of integration of all the arts and crafts was something that really provided and a wonderful working environment. And that is what I attempted to do at the National College. And I'm happy to see that they have actually continued with that practice. And I mean, we have to keep working at it. This is not an easy thing to do. It's a question of changing pedagogies and to constantly be focusing on those, and to be ready to move with the times. And we know that today we live in this digital age, and we know how important media is and media studies are and things like that. So that was one of the things that I can say it was an achievement. And the other thing was to create linkages. I think that was also really important. I think the linkages, I mean, one of the most important linkages for me was, of course, with the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. And a lot of effort was made to actually create that linkage.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it was a question of signing MOUs with the institutions within the country, whether it
Yes.
was the Beacon House National University School of Visual Art and Design, whether it was the Pakistan Institute of Fashion Design, whether it was the Indus Valley School, because I really believed that we have to, in one way or another, pool our resources and our human resource in particular, because
Definitely.
I think that we can't, we don't have the luxury to actually just work in silos. But the
I
greater
agree.
conversation that takes place and the sharing that takes place, it really makes a difference. So I did make an attempt to even open up the doors, for example, for our library, which is open to the use of anybody as a reading library, from schools to these other art institutions. It's one of the best libraries for art, I would imagine. I would love to say that it's in the entire subcontinent. There isn't a library like that.
No, but
So
that's
I
very
really worked hard.
generous. And were you
Mhm.
also responsible for the opening up of the Rawalpindi campus? Because I saw that you were principal of both.
Yeah, well, the Rawalpindi campus had been set up before I took
Okay.
over as principal by Professor Sagda Vandal. And but you see, she retired shortly after it was established,
Hmm.
and it was up to me to actually get it to move on. I mean, the entire project to move on. And so there were some things that, I mean, it was a very, very challenging position to be in, because
Of
you had
course.
one step in Rawalpindi and the other step in Lahore. And so with the Rawalpindi campus, I knew that you cannot replicate the National College of Arts. That
Hmm.
was not a good idea. So that it should have its own character and its own, it should evolve on its own as an independent entity, really, in many respects. And that's what I believed in then, and I believe in now as well. But I did small things. They may look very small right now, but I think they were important. I mean, for example, in the summer, I opened up the institution, to the space in the institution to artists who work, and particularly Hamra Abbas, who did a huge body of work in the basement of the Rawalpindi campus.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
yeah, she worked, and then she was ready to exhibit. And I think she had a show in China, or I'm
Hmm.
not sure where she had a show, but she did a lot of very important and very large scale work, which she didn't would never have had the space to do had it not been provided to her. So I really believed in creating these kind of spaces and residencies and making institutions more conducive to the artists actually coming and working, or for that matter, any form of researchers or writers or people from overseas and so on. So that was the kind of thing that I was encouraging. I
No, you're
also
right. Hmm.
started a journal, which was the first journal, the Journal of Arts and Culture. And of course, we ran into quite a lot of trouble because of that journal, but still, it was launched in 2010, and
Okay.
we brought out three really, really good, editions of it in hard copy. And so that was I think it was a big achievement at the time.
I think it is. I
And
think one of the
and
things.
also helped in getting students to, my own wonderful faculty, young faculty, encouraging them to go and study abroad, to facilitate them. I mean, for example, Farida Batul, I gave her one of the scholarships to go and do her doctorate. And there are other people as well, but I would say that, well, I did manage to do that. And every single person makes a difference within the
Of course.
institution. Yeah.
And Farida came back and set up a new department at NCA, so obviously that
That's
also
right.
paid off.
That's right. So there were
Yeah.
the, so there's always this kind of movement and the encouragement and the support that you get from, not just your peers, but your elders, and then and your peers, and everybody comes together in all of this. So it's a question of really how invested one is within the institution at every level. And I think I was certainly one of those people.
And what in
I
your
still am.
experience, yeah,
Mhm.
of course you still are, but what in your experience is still lacking from the university level, perhaps focusing on art education is still lacking?
Well, you see, when we talk of art education, I don't know whether you're referring to the field of art and design education or whether you're talking about art education in its broader kind of context. So, because
I would say both,
education is a
perhaps.
specific field, and
Yes.
of course, I mean, I do think that it should be encouraged in most art schools. And actually, that's one of the things that I worked towards. Shortly after I retired, I was invited to join the School of Visual Art and Design at Beacon House National University. And one of the things that I was busy with over there was to help in developing a master's in art education. And
Okay.
we thought that it would be a good idea to have this master's program as a low residency program to begin with in the
Hmm.
summer holidays, and mainly for teachers who are teaching in schools, and they teach art in schools across the country. And we had a lot of very interesting people who were involved in that whole development process, led mainly by Salima Hashmi herself, because Professor Hashmi had studied art education formally. And I had done a bit of it as well. So we put our forces together, and we had the late Saira Sheikh, and we had Razia Sadiq, who was at that time at Columbia University, and many others. Sara Ahmed, and we had Sabak Bash, and so on. All these people came in to help in the developing of this program. But if you were to talk about, you asked me about art, the arts generally. I think that, if you look at the university structure, you've got, you know, arts and humanities come at the bottom of the rung. The
Hmm.
topmost is, of course, science and technology, followed by the social sciences. They've managed to edge their way in, because they were really in quite bad shape until they
Hmm.
gave it a great big push. But the arts and the humanities, unfortunately, are at the bottom. And I'm very sad about that, because I think that for any kind of society to thrive and flourish, you have to focus on that nurturing of the arts. And the arts, and by the arts, I mean all the arts. I mean poetry, and I mean literature, and I mean the visual arts, and I mean the performing arts, because all of these things are part of our culture, and particularly in our culture, where we have so many rich examples to follow. And I think that this is where the makers of policy and the people who give out the funding, that they have to do that. So
Hmm.
I'm trying my best
I'm glad to hear you're on
even
the
now.
side of the arts, even now.
Oh, absolutely. No society can be balanced unless it cannot ever develop in a balanced way unless it recognizes the importance of the arts and supports the
Completely.
arts in every way. Mm.
And I suppose this is a somewhat unfair question, considering you have achieved and accomplished so very much in your sort of career as an academic and a teacher and a leader of institutions. But is there something that you are most proud of having accomplished? Is there one perhaps department or one perhaps policy that you push through, or even one student or a particular like artist who you think, you know what, I'm so proud of having done X, Y, and Z to have their career flourish?
I have so many students, countless students. I think, as I told you earlier, that one of the things that happened in it just so happened it was in the kind of DNA of the National College of Arts, and it's something to do with being an art educator and being an
Mm-hmm.
art student. That kind of interaction where you're talking about your ideas and you have that one-on-one, exchange, and those kind of crits in which you open yourself up entirely. And it's not the sort of thing that you do if you're marking an essay. It's very different because it's sort of removed, it's slightly more objective. But this is very personal, and it is something that really touches one to the core. And I think so there's so many people. I don't know whether I can only mention one person, but I know that while they were just students, the relationship was at one level. And as we have progressed, over the years, the relationship has actually become stronger and cemented even more. So, for example, if I look at somebody like Sabina Gilani, who was my student in the mid 80s, one of the first people from the miniature painting department to graduate from the miniature painting department. She's a great friend of mine, and wherever I can, she's seeking my advice, and I'm talking to her, or whether it's Leila or Atif or Fatma Saeed or Imran Ahmed or the countless Rabia Jalil who Romila. I mean, there are so many people. Nuraya. I mean, there are people who are all over the country and even living out of the country, from printmakers, I would say. But apart from that, there are serious conversations, and I'm very fortunate that people do come and talk to me about what's happening in their life or with their work. And I think that I'm very privileged to be able to share in that. And so I think it's very difficult for me to just take one or two names, because I'm always going to be leaving someone out, which is not fair. And there are people who have always stood by me, and Asad Hai is one of my printmaking students. Ali Raza is one of my printmaking students, as is Samina Iqbal.
Yes, so the
I mean, the
list goes
list
on
goes on and on,
essentially.
you see.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. So I
And
think
your
that
students become your legacy in a sense.
in a way they do. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that I was instrumental in, I've been instrumental in facilitating a few things. I mean, for example, particularly with Rashid, um,
And with
and
Rashid, you've worked. I mean, you curated his absolutely phenomenal show at Mohatta
yeah,
Palace in 2013. I was actually going to come to that next. I'm really happy
okay,
that you brought it up.
mm.
Tell me,
Yeah. Well,
because
you
I know that
see,
you. No, because I was going to
I
say that
think
I know that in addition to sort of being an artist and a printmaker and being an academic, you are also a curator. And this is, well, one of the most important shows to have happened in Pakistan, a massive solo exhibition. It was a sort of mid-career retrospective for him. So I was wanted to ask about that journey and that process a little bit as well.
I think that the conversation and my kind of friendship with Rashid was essentially, it really begins with the ideas and the legacy of Zahurul Akhlaq, to whom
Mm.
he is always, he says that that's where he starts from, because of his ideas. And I think that when Rashid came back from Boston after finishing his studies, we again continued that kind of discussion and about his work essentially. And I think that subsequently, I could see that Rashid was thinking at such a big scale, and he was thinking, it was very difficult for him to be actually showing his work just anywhere. He needed to have the kind of right space and so on.
Mm-hmm.
The possibility of holding Rashid's mid-career exhibition at Mohatta Palace. And I talked to Hamid Haroon, and in fact, we had a huge meeting actually on my dining table with Rashid and Hamid Haroon. Hamid had a good look at his work. He didn't know him, he was not familiar with the work.
Oh,
And it was
really?
only when that happened, then it was possible, you see, for this to unfold, as it were. So, of course, it was a very
Mm-hmm.
big challenge because we had strong people. We had Hamid Harun to deal with, and then there was the Mohatta establishment itself inside the museum, which was quite challenging, and that was it. So that's how it happened.
How,
But of course, I mean, Rashid, we negotiated a great deal, and we would discuss what he wanted. He had very kind of strong ideas of how he wanted his work to be put out, and there were, and me being quite a strong person myself, I would also discuss with him. In some places, I would say, Rashid, I think this is a better idea than that, and we
of
really
course.
want to have a flow to the whole movement within the museum. We're using both floors up and down. We're creating a special space for desperately seeking paradise. We're going to have all these videos. There was some work that we had to compromise on. We didn't have the means to actually put it up, but I think overall it was actually a very ambitious project, and it was a very interesting project as well. And we got this catalog, which Hamid, of course, wanted a huge catalog, but it is rather big. But it is certainly there are some, interesting, very interesting perspectives, essays that have been written for that catalog, and I'm, I really, for me, it was a learning process. All of this is a learning process. So
And
that's
you
it.
wrote for the catalog as well, right?
Of course, I,
As
I wrote basically the essay. I mean, Hamid crossed some T's and put some commas on it, but by and large he agreed with what I was doing. So I
with your
did
expert opinion, I'm sure. But
hard
tell me,
work.
because I know that you also have a very vast publication history in terms of the books you've produced, essays that you've written, and talks that you've done. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. What is it that piques your interest as a writer? And because personally, I think that publishing and writing is extremely important, and clearly you do as well, given the journal that you had begun. So
Well,
just
I
tell me a
think that
little bit
I mean
about
I
your
do think
publishing.
Yeah, I do think that I should be publishing much more, and it's
Mm.
about time that I wrote the one or two books that are very much things that I have to do, and I have to set that time aside, because in the way that when you make art, you've got to become quite selfish about your time. In the same way, I think that I really should be putting all my essays and thoughts and a lot of research together and bringing them out, because it's about time that I did that. I need a little bit of help, but I think I can get it if I make up my mind this is what I'm going to do. But
Definitely.
I think that that I have the writing itself falls into different categories. I mean, I've done some writing which is to do with contemporary art and artists. I'm very interested in doing more writing in that area,
Hmm.
and certain artists that whose work I admire greatly, like Anwar Said, I want to write about them. And at the same time, I'm looking at these kind of shifts that are occurring, the transitions that have occurred from modern art in our part of the world into what is the contemporary art of today, and the kind of how it has overlapped and how it has shaped itself, and where there are these very, very interesting intersections. And what is the turn of the century meant, and what has the digital revolution meant? I mean, all
Wow.
these things become important in the context of what is being written about it. And so I think that I have to think about that, and I have to write about it. So there is some writing which is purely researched. uh, I'm very interested in the Mayo School of Art and all those early years of the Mayo School. I have done work on Kipling, on Ramsing, and I should be actually talking more about them and writing more about them, publishing those kind of findings and making the connections, how the past has a
Wonderful.
relevance in the present. I'm very interested in that idea, how the past informs the present. And I think that because everything is happening in this kind of local context and the global context, and how it all sort of moves in the circular movement, and also the back and forth And so I'm very deeply interested in that. And also the pedagogies as they shift and change, and what the responsibilities are of people who are teachers and educators, and how the students of today, how to be more, in a sense, aware of of how younger people are thinking, and what are their ideas, and what is the Z generation, what drives them. And so I'm very engaged with that and very, very
I
involved with
can't
it.
wait for you to actually publish
Yeah.
these. I think it'll be fascinating to read about
Yes,
your
yes.
learnings and
And I think
findings
that
and
I
thoughts.
would, I would like to also very briefly say that, some of the wonderful artists whom I have had such huge regard for. I mean, when I see the way that they started their practices in a very traditional mode, I mean, like Imran Qureshi or Aisha, for example. I mean, I'm just giving two examples. There are actually many, many more. But and just to
Yes.
give those examples, but how they started learning very traditional techniques, and how they moved away from that very, very orthodox way of working, and moved more and more and became more and more experimental. And certainly Imran, in my opinion, is one of the most, intuitively, he just sort of resolves things, and that's how he works. And I enjoy that very much. I enjoy the kind of energy that he has in his work.
It's
Um,
absolutely true. They all artists sort of after learning, they move towards this sort of resolve with themselves where they start creating work that is wholly their own. And because of that, there's this fluidity, there's this freedom to it,
Yes,
almost
I
like
mean,
an
they're
effortless
flying,
grace.
absolutely
Yes.
flying. I mean, I think of people like Bani or Faiza, or, wonderful people who are in all other parts of the world, Ruby or Saira Wasim, or, I mean, so many people. And I'm sorry if I'm forgetting others. I can see
I'm sure
Ali
they'll forgive you.
Zaidi has made some kind of a comment. And I think of him, and I think of his work, I remember it. I remember photographs that they've taken, when they were students, and they're etched in my mind, and what they're
And
doing
speaking,
today.
no, it's absolutely true. And speaking of, we haven't really spoken about your work properly yet. We touched upon it in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I wanted to sort of delve into it a little bit more. And I was wondering if you could chat a little bit more about maybe a particular piece or a body of work that stood out to you at that time and really informed the rest of your practice. I do know that recently you've been working as well. You were talking to me about how you just finished up a new piece, and perhaps you'd like to chat about that.
Yeah, well, you see, the earlier work, I mean, if I look at the throughout the 80s, I've already talked about my very deep kind of political concerns. And
Yes.
I think that that is something it was in one way or another, the way that I could express myself. It was shown in the work, and it came through in the work.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly, as time has gone on, I think I've always tried to work with different mediums, and so I've also shifted in that sense. And so I've sometimes worked, some of the work is very handmade. Printmaking, in any case, is something with which you engage with, with there's a lot of, at least with etching, because you're wiping and cleaning and printing and that kind of thing. But also working on paper, very different experience to working on canvas and so on. Given up working on
Hmm.
canvas entirely, except for one or two projects where I have worked, stitched into a cloth and so on. And that's been an exciting experience also. But of late, I am kind of dabbling with the idea of digital prints. I have worked
Hmm.
with them earlier, and I'm thinking of maybe more than just one medium, but perhaps to combine two or three things. And the most recent work is actually something that is, as they say, hot off the press, because it
Ooh,
is
do tell.
about to be installed. Is this big project in Lahore, which is the billboard project that the Lahore Biennale Foundation is doing, and Qudsiya Rahim. And one of my works, I mean, it is in response to the pandemic. And I think for the past couple of years, I think that, there are lots of tragic things that have happened around me. The loss of my friend Asma, real tragedy that I just simply cannot get over. And I think that, I become, in a sense, when they say I'm at a loss for images, but I'm not
Hmm.
at a loss for words. And there are certain words that come into mind, and they come to mind, and those are the words that I'm using, that kind of text in the work right now, because it's the sheer simplicity and the explicit nature of that text, that we look at it and it has a visual, obviously, impact, but at the same time it embodies so much meaning that can be interpreted sometimes quite easily, and at other times it is something that leaves one thinking, and it's silence really. And so I'm working with that, and I just worked on this one billboard, and it says pause, and it's in
Hmm.
response to this year 2020. So it says pause, and then there are these two lines under it, which, when you have the play button and you have the pause button, so it's like the
Yes.
pause button. And I'm using the scrim, which is the chadar sort of metaphor, all the time. I have used it sort of at different times during the course of my entire career, and so this time round I am using it, and again at that scale. And so, because I think that this year is like a pause year, I think that it's extraordinary, it's unreal. We're in somewhere, either we're in a state of limbo or we're in a state of complete anxiety. And so
That's very true.
I'm
That happened to me
engaging with
earlier
it.
today.
Yeah.
No, and that happened to me earlier today where suddenly I was like, oh God, I've been here for almost a year. And it was the strangest feeling. And I started panicking. And then I thought, no, no, you have to pull yourself out of it in a sense. But really, when I saw
Yes,
that piece of yours, because I put that on the Art Divvy Insta, what's it called, a story thing, and it's beautiful. And you get lost within, it's a beautiful deep blue, is it not? And you sort of get
that's
lost
right.
within it. And you just see that word pause. And I felt this great feeling of comfort looking at it.
Yeah. I think
And
that
I
as
think
an
what you said,
artist,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, that's what one does. I think that, you work for yourself essentially. You unravel things and you resolve things, and they're for yourself. And it's only when then you share them, in some form or another, and then they open to other interpretation, etc. But essentially it is that kind of dialogue with oneself that is really at the essence of it all.
And that the most important as well. I have to say, I found this conversation so inspiring because I feel as though you are, perhaps even without realizing it, constantly looking forward, like deeply rooted in the present, but also very, very aware of the future. And I really enjoy that. Through the work that you have done, it's all been so forward thinking and so perceptive at the same time. So, what is next for you, speaking of that? We've spoken of what you've been
Well,
doing up to now,
no,
but
I
what's
think that,
next?
as I said, that, doing more writing, making work quietly, just carrying on with some of the ideas that I have, a lot of help that I'm getting from my most wonderful, wonderful former students who are my colleagues today. I've just had a discussion with Atif Khan, and I want to,
Hmm.
I don't have a full fledged studio, so I'm going to put some of my equipment in his studio because he has a space. And so, then I can go and use it already as it's installed and so on, and it'll be functional. And so that's one of the things that I'm planning on doing immediately. And with when as you said, that I am the kind of great optimist. I know I deal with great pain and injustice and difficulties, and all the time I'm dealing with that because of the my experience of what happens in our society. And but at the same time, I'm this great optimist who believes that yes, change will come. We have to keep striving. We have to keep doing. And I suppose for me, I have to be challenging myself more, not talking so much,
So
but
we all need to
working
be
much
more
more.
like you, I think. I'm going to open it up to questions because we still have a few minutes.
Okay.
Oh, Lali says that she misses you and she loved the discussion. She used to run to class.
Okay, that's lovely.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Please ask before we sign off. And the suggestions for when we couldn't hear you are really funny. Somebody's like, please write something on paper and hold it up to her. I think you could hear us, right?
I couldn't hear you at all,
Oh, you couldn't hear us
actually.
either. Oh, okay.
You were just, your mouth was just kind of just moving.
Moving.
That's why I became desperate. And in the comment, I wrote
Oh
help.
no. Oh, well, I'm glad we sorted it out. So there's a question here that there's been a
Yeah.
substantial increase in the number of institutions offering art education. Are you satisfied with the passion and seriousness of students these days?
I think students are always very serious, particularly when they make a decision that they're going to go into a field, a specific kind of field. And in the arts, in any case, my belief is that students come because they believe that they want to become artists and designers and architects. I mean, they come already; they're driven by it. But the thing is that I think that where we have a long way to go is to build up a whole corpus of educators
Mm,
who have been through, for example, with art education, who have been through art education in the field of art education, have studied it, and have research that they've carried out within it. And that's what we need, because you opening up departments is not just the solution. And just being an artist, a trained or an educated artist who's done a BFA or even an MFA to start teaching art education, I don't think that that is the way to go.
no, you're quite right.
Mm.
It has to be a more sort of. Oh, thanks, Jessica. Does anybody else have any questions for Ma'am Najji before we sign off? I've been hogging her time, so I'm giving you all an opportunity. Well, it seems not right now. So I think that, oh, well, here we go. How do you think art will act as an agency for change in Lahore?
I think it has always been an agency for change, so it will continue to be that. I think Lahore has got this really dynamic presence, as a city, and just the privilege of living in this city is something that will be, that it opens up all kinds of opportunities. I mean, I look at some of the most wonderful films that are being made. At the National College of Art, there's a great department of film and television. And I was fortunate enough to be invited as a juror a couple of times,
Oh, wonderful.
and I cannot tell you that I was just bowled over. And these are, this is to do with life and with living and with the stories that people are writing, and the kind of inspiration that they get just from being part of this city is, I think, just wonderful. So I think that art will be and will continue to be a harbinger of change.
I do agree with you. And there's another great question. I think this might have to be the last one. There are times artists get burdened by their own signature. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, I think that there is a tendency for artists to sometimes, they repeat themselves, or some artists have great big egos, so
Mm.
that can be a problem, because they do believe in their own work to such in such a strong way that I suppose
And they
that
have
becomes a
to, yeah.
signature. They have to believe in it. And so I don't have a problem with that. But I think that and I don't believe in making compromises of any kind. But I think that you have to be a good person, basically, and I think that
Yeah.
that kind of sincerity and honesty is what is more important. So, irrespective of how it manifests itself, I think that if you can carry that spirit of generosity and empathy, and and make your work with that spirit, within that spirit, I think that you really do change the world
I agree with you, and I also
and
think that
yourself.
no, and I think that especially in Pakistan, we're so lucky because so many fantastic artists like yourself continue to teach, continue to mentor, and continue to
Yes.
give back in ways that are absolutely enormous and so rare. So we're all very lucky to have that. But I think we have run out of time. So, Ma'am Najji, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. And I feel as if we've barely scraped the surface of your fabulous career and what you have worked upon. I wanted to ask you so many more questions, but we will save that for another conversation. So, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you, everyone.